this is what Game Week 27 taught us. So with huge green arrows for some managers and the ranks changing, one important lesson Game Week 27 taught us was you need to have the right players for the game week. I'll explain that. Hold on, I'll explain that later in the video. So this is a breakdown of Game Week 27 as FPL managers. We'll break down some very important things that happened, and we'll also give you some tips to consider prior to Game Week 28. Before we do get into it, I would like you to kindly hit that subscribe button, like, comment. Let's know where your plans are also heading into Game Week 28. So as I said in my previous video, I gave you some players to consider for captaincy choices, and these players gave massive returns. So I mentioned the likes of Joao Pedro. I also mentioned Erling Haaland, and they gave good returns for managers who had them or who captained them. So Joao Pedro scored he scored a goal, so that was a plus. Haaland also gave an assist, and both players had a bonus point of 1, which was kind of good for the game week. So prior to the game week, I mentioned them for captaincy choices, and they delivered. As I said, Game Week 27 also taught us something important, which is having the right players. And this game week wasn't about having the top players, but it was just about including differentials. Why am I saying this? Because you look at the likes of O'Reilly, who was owned by very, very few managers. He provided the highest points for the game week. We could look at players like Henderson, who was also owned by very few managers, and they also provided. You could also consider Munez, who from Crystal Palace, who also gave some good points. You would want to look at some Brighton players who were owned by very few managers, but also gave very good points. We would look at some of the players later in the video, but that is one important thing, that every game week is either a differential or your main players. But this game week, it was more of differential. So that is how it was looking for Game Week 27. We'll look at the fixtures, then we go through how other things went. So it started with a 1-1 draw. It was Aston Villa Leeds. Then we had Brighton beating Brentford by 2-0. Chelsea also playing a 1-1 draw with Burnley. Then we had Bournemouth also playing a goalless draw with West Ham. City beat Newcastle by 2-1. Then on Sunday we had Crystal Palace beating Wolves by 1 goal. We had Liverpool also beating Nottingham Forest by that 1 goal. We had Fulham winning by 3-1 against Sunderland. And then we also had Arsenal beating Spurs comfortably away. They beat Tottenham at their home. They beat them by 4-1. Then on Monday we had that lone goal for Manchester United to gain the victory over Everton, kind courtesy of the Sesko goal assisted by Mbeumo. So that's how I was looking for the fixtures. So we want to look at the player stats, see how some players performed for the game week. So Game Week 27, as I said, O'Reilly was the top player for the game week. He ended up with 17 points, owned by 7.1% of managers. So it's rising because most managers are beginning to go in for him. We had Henderson. He also provided 16 points. So that was 7.4 ownership by most managers. Then we had Eze also providing 7 points. He had 14 points, owned by 7.8. We had Iwobi, 13 points provided, owned by 0.8. It goes on and on and on, and you can see clearly that very few managers had all these players who performed, and they gave massive returns. So I think the highest owned player here would be Virgil, who was owned by 25.1% of managers, and he provided 11 points. So that was a plus. So you have Van Hickey, all these players in the owned by very few managers, but they gave massive returns for the game week. So as I say, it's always good to always sometimes include differentials. Other times you have your top players in there, you include a few differentials, and it goes both ways for you. So that is how it was looking for the game week, the top players. So as I said, O'Reilly 7.4, the ownership 7.1. Sorry, ownership increasing gradually as most managers are bringing for the new game week, that is Game Week 28. You have Virgil van Dijk, you have Szoboszlai, you have Thiago you have Seminole Hill, and all these players are going to give massive returns for the subsequent game weeks. Liverpool have some very good run coming up. We'll look at that in a minute. They have a very good run coming up, so you also want to consider some Liverpool players. Riley has been in good form, but would that how would that continue? Would also You would also want to keep an eye on him. He's provided some good returns. Last game week he provided some good returns. The game week that was game week 26 provided some good returns. Did same for game week 27. So we'll see whether it's going to continue for game week 28. But this is a City team that are quite determined. So you expect that hopefully the good form continues. So all these players here have some high ownership. Looks like Joao Pedro is still in the mix thereabouts, even though Chelsea have a wicked run coming up. Most managers or FPL managers would want to take out some Chelsea players, as a few are still struggling with form and they have a very wicked run coming up. But I believe there's a Chelsea team that's also quite determined. So having a player in Joao Pedro in your team won't be a bad idea. You could use him as a very bold differential, and it could easily pay off. Palmer too has a very bold differential, but not every game week, because they have some very, as I said, wicked fixtures coming up. So you have the likes of Mbeumo, Bruno Fernandes. Manchester United are continuing with their good form, so you'd want to have these players as they are in the mix when it comes either goals or assists for the Manchester United side. So you also want to keep them, as I said. When it comes to the FDL, this is how the FDL looks like. So for the next about 2 to 3 game weeks, you can easily go through. You'd see some of the managers, some of the teams. Sorry, so you look at Arsenal. They have some um, made to difficult fixtures coming up. Arsenal are in good form, so you expect them to try and maneuver their way. But even still, they have some very tricky fixtures coming up for the next 3 to 4 game weeks. The blank game week 31. So you also want to consider that, as I did in my previous video, the chip strategy. You'd see that we have Crystal Palace, they are blanking also game week 31. We have Manchester United also blanking. So you also want to consider that because of the cup fixtures and other competitions. So Aston Villa they have a good game against Wolves, after which they have some 2 very tricky fixtures coming up. Then it continues from there. So you'd want to be very strategic with your selections. As I said, Chelsea have some very wicked fixtures coming back to back to back to back to back. So you want to be very cautious when it comes to your Chelsea selections. But I believe this is a team that are very determined, and it could also pay off very well for them. Liverpool have a good run coming up, so you'll want to consider your Liverpool players for your team. City to have some good fixtures coming up until the blank game week for game week 31. So you want to consider that. Manchester United have somewhat good fixtures coming up. So they are in good form. They are doing their best. So why not consider them? So you can just easily go through, get your teams, see how you plan to use your chips for the game week. If you are really lost on how to go about, just visit my past video chips strategy, and you'd have a fair idea of how to go about it. So let's look at how some managers or the top managers did for this game week. So averagely, we had 45 points for this game week. Highest being 117, and this is how his team looked like. I think he had most of the top performers. He had Henderson, and good, unfortunately for him. So fortunately for him, he ended up with a captain for Henderson. So his captain being started, that was Mateta. So his vice captain was Henderson. The captaincy went to him, and he was rewarded massively. He had the likes of Menez, he had Virgil, he had McAllister, he had Eze, he had Jokeres. All these players provided massive points. So that is what helped him for the game week as the top manager for the game week. So for the overall, we have this manager leading the charts. He's risen. So he had the likes of Virgil, he had Harry Wilson, he had Mbeumo, he captained Haaland, and he had some manageable points. So let's see what number 2. So this manager also had Virgil, he had Joao Pedro, he had Haaland, he had Wilson. So the normal squad, Virgil being the differential in the which helped him. So this manager also had Virgil, he had Haaland, he had Neto, and these players provided good returns for him. So basically, that is how it was looking for Game Week 27. For Game Week 28, as I said, you'd want to consider some Liverpool players. So if you don't have Virgil van Dijk, you want to have him as he could easily provide some defensive contributions for you as well as some good clean sheet points, which would be a plus. And if you want a very low cost defender, you could be looking at Hill from Bournemouth as he's provided some good defensive contributions and he's low price. So that would be a plus for you. When it comes to attacking, you want to look at the likes of Shabosala, you want to look at the likes of Vet, you also want to consider the likes of Haaland, Semenyo, as they all have some good fixtures coming up, and it's going to be very good for you. So this is how my team was looking. I had a very basic team. I had the likes of Semenyo. I captained Semenyo. He gave some defensive contributions, hence 4 points for the game week. I had Haaland. I had Joao Pedro, and that was my team. I had Van Heke on the bench, rather unfortunate. So that was how my team was looking. Petrovic given 9 points. So let's see how we there are going to be some few changes for game week 28. I'm considering bringing in some Liverpool players, a low priced defender from Bournemouth. So I'm considering Hill, and would also consider a different attacker. So I could easily would see how that goes. So you'd want to watch out for my game week 28 preview video. We'll give you some tips to consider for the game week, and would also see how things go. So before we do go, leave a comment. Let's know what your plans are also heading into the game week, how well you did. We are out.